Social scientists and other kinds of researchers do not have a stranglehold over the ability to remain critically aware of that in which we're immersed, right? Human beings have a capacity for coming to a recognition about the ways in which they're implicated in various sorts of social media, more broadly defined as the ways in which we're socially embedded. My name is Brent Luvaas. I am Associate Professor of Global Studies at Drexel University and also a graduate faculty member in Communication, Culture, and Media. And I am, by training, an anthropologist. I do work in cultural and visual anthropology. And my chapter was, in fact, largely about me. I wrote it as an autoethnography, so a kind of self-reflective analysis of my own experience as a blogger and would-be social media influencer over the course of about 4 years as I was doing an autoethnographic project on street-style bloggers. So people who go out into the world with cameras, stopping interesting-looking people on the streets and then featuring them in their social media and blog platforms. And I looked at that process originally as it was being enfolded into the fashion industry. The chapter was about my experience carrying out that research, the sort of advantages and disadvantages of taking this kind of perspective. Obviously, there are a lot of advantages. You get an insider's point of view about what it takes to produce social media content. You figure out all the ins and outs of building a following, developing brand partnerships, but also the limitations and the emotional complications of doing research on yourself and how you avoid the pitfalls and perils, if you can, in fact, do that. My background is as an anthropologist. Anthropology has used ethnography as its primary research methodology for over 100 years now. We go out into the field, we immerse ourselves among people, we try to get an insider's point of view. However, I was doing a project about people who are not community in any traditional sense. They don't exist somewhere where you can go and immerse yourself among them. They're dispersed all over the world. I had the simple methodological difficulty of trying to figure out, how do I do research on people who are dispersed all over the place and who only connect with each other through these online platforms? And it seemed to me that the obvious answer to that was to do what they do, to immerse myself in blogging and social media the way that the people I'm studying do, and then to connect with them through those platforms. It really transformed my process as an anthropologist away from more classical, traditional techniques of ethnography towards more autoethnographic and self-reflective modes, but also more towards visual anthropology. So I don't think I would have defined myself as a visual anthropologist prior to this project. But through this project, photography became not just a way to illustrate and represent the ideas that I was writing about, but became an avenue in its own right. As we've already discussed, ethnography has been ethnographers, I should say, have been deeply committed to the idea of going somewhere and being among people. Digitality in general really complicates that process for a number of reasons. One is that more and more of what we would think of, what we're discussing as creator culture, right, happens in an online environment. So if you're studying any kind of creative activity today, you're going to need to figure out how to retool ethnography for the moment that we're living through. Another real interesting implication, I think, for ethnography today has to do with that concept I just mentioned of leaving the field. Historically, you go somewhere, you collect data, and then you remove yourself from that somewhere so that you can gain critical distance from it. But when you either maintain a connection with the people that were in that place digitally, or you're simply doing your work online in the first place, there isn't that same sense of going to and leaving the field. It's getting harder, I think, to achieve that critical distance. So I sort of see that difficulty as having to be confronted by ethnographers in the future. When I became interested in fashion blogs, one of the reasons that I was interested in it is that it seemed like a relatively novel thing that amateur fans of fashion could be a part of the fashion world, right? There was the fashion world, and the fashion world was seen as this kind of elite space in which a chosen few editors and designers and other people with very specialized occupations got to participate in the conversation. But then what happened is, of course, that the bloggers got sucked inside. Right? They became part of the industry, and the fashion industry itself had to retool in order to deal with the reality of blogs. So by the time I started attending New York Fashion Week, for instance, as part of this project back in 2012, all the editors, all of the stylists, all the people who were lining up outside shows to get their pictures taken by street style photographers, all of them were playing by the rules that were set by the bloggers. And I think fashion's really never going to be the same thing after that shift. Now, it's not as if the outsiders are all in now. It's not as if the playing field has been leveled, but the rules of the game have shifted really profoundly. My chapter really speaks to the idea that the tools you use to do your research have larger implications, not just in terms of the conclusions that you reach, but for who you are personally. We are transformed by the research that we do, really the conclusion that I reach. And that is particularly the case in autoethnographic work, where you make yourself into one of the objects of study. Those affects and emotions that animate social media, that sort of sense of obsessiveness, the desire for a following, that kind of need to continuously post, all that stuff. You feel that firsthand as an autoethnographic researcher of social media, probably as a researcher of social media more generally. And that hold that social media has on people also applies to us as researchers of social media. I have been for the last few years doing a project on street photographers. So not street style, not the people who are going around taking pictures of fashionable individuals on the street, but people in the more classic street photographic tradition who wander around and take candid pictures of strangers on the street without their permission. And that was going great, but then the pandemic more or less ended street photography for a certain period of time. Right? People didn't feel comfortable going out in the streets and taking pictures for obvious reasons. And the conversation around what constitutes appropriate personal space and distance has shifted and really made that project different than it otherwise would have been. So I've been thinking a lot about the way that the pandemic and social media and digital devices like cameras have shifted our understanding about personal space and these sorts of boundaries.